Well, why don't we go ahead and get started with some introductions, and I'm sure some other folks will join us as we do that. But there's only so much banter that folks want to listen to as they've already signed in. Welcome to this webinar today. My name's Amanda Deaver, and I'll be your moderator. Our two presenters have so many wonderful things to say. If you've been listening to this conversation, you can tell that they've worked together for years and really admire and enjoy each other's company. And so what you're going to get to hear today is really just a conversation between the two of them on leadership issues. My job is really to kind of keep the conversation going. Please feel free to put questions in the chat box throughout the conversation. If we can get to them real time, we will. Otherwise, we'll hold time at the end to get to as many of those questions as we can. We're also obviously recording today's webinar because Topher hit the button. And if you have to leave early or want to share this with some other folks, we'll get an email around to everybody, and it'll be on the MTM website in a day or two. So let me introduce our two panelists. I think most of you probably know both of them, but Topher Hansen is president and CEO of Centerpoint, based in Lincoln, Nebraska. Centerpoint's a thriving provider of mental health and substance use disorder care, and for several years now has also operated as a certified community behavioral health clinic. Topher started his career in the behavioral health field as a volunteer for the Drug Crisis Center in 1975, and after a brief time as a counselor with Centerpoint, he attended law school, practiced law from 1985 to 1993. And then during his time in private practice, he also served as a Centerpoint board member and as legal counsel for the organization. And then in 1993, he returned to the Centerpoint staff as Director of Development and Legal Counsel and became CEO in 2000. David Lloyd is the founder and Chief Operating Officer of MTM Services. He began his behavioral health career first as a member of the board of directors of a CBHO with over 300 clinical staff, serving more than 8,000 people in North Carolina. He later joined the staff as an assistant area director for operations and then assistant area director for program services. And in 1995, he founded MTM, and since then has worked with nearly 1,000 organizations, helping them to leverage complex data to inform management and operational decision-making. As you will hear today, Topher and David have worked together over many years on many issues, and they share a lot of similar insights and perspectives, but they also have a wonderful time talking with each other about how to do what they do and how to help others do things better and make informed decisions and move individuals into leadership positions and good leadership decision making. Our goal today is really to share with all of you some of the insights and lessons that they've learned over their career. So let's get into it. And again, if you've got questions, put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get to all of them. So first, let's talk about change. Both of you really believe that change is essential to a successful organization. It's not something to be avoided, it's something to be embraced and sought after. How do you as leaders cultivate a change mindset? And what are the qualities of people or organizations that succeed in implementing change? How do you become successful at change? Topher, maybe do you want to start with that one?
Certainly. I look at organizations as living beings, and as we all know that we evolve in our own life as human beings, and other living things evolve as well. Organizations are that same way. While some of it needs to fall off because it is out of date or is no longer a best practice, or we've learned smarter ways to do things, other things need to be brought on. So it's dynamic all the time. And so in leadership, part of what I do in leadership is try to look out on the horizon for what the developments are that are evolving our industry, and different ways to think about things like our language is one of the things that we have been working on at Centerpoint over the last several years, of evolving our lexicon to be more scientific, more precise, more pertinent to the issues, less judgmental, and a more professional description of what's happening. And for instance, we have chosen not to call the people we serve clients, consumers, or patients. We call them people that we serve. I know it took us a long time to think of that. Or we refer to them as individuals in service, or a person in service, or people in service. But we try to relate to that, to the human person, because what we think that does is, rather than, there's always a power differential between those serving and those being served, and there's always got to be a boundary, but we can still try and level the playing field a little bit so they feel it's more accessible to come in and work with people and not have mistrust and some other things that may have been engendered over their years. So it's things like that that we, in looking around, have spotted and said, okay, this is an evolution we need to take. And so that is one example of the multitude of issues that need to evolve. It's also clinical and process and information technology, and so on and so on and so on. So I think that's how you grow. It's how we all evolve. And if you're not evolving, you're dying.
And Topher, yeah, I agree with you. It's I was working with a CEO this morning who's been in with his center and in our industry for 47 years, and I was doing a focus group on workforce engagement, and one of the things that we talked about is that there is never a time, certainly now in our current state of change with healthcare reform, CCBHCs, all the things that are out there, the different funding mechanisms, there's never a time now that we aren't required to respond to an external change. And what Topher said is very important. A leader has to be able to see the horizon. Where are we going? Where do we need to go? And if that leader doesn't carry that role, then who will? But the question is, once you start to look at what needs to change, and I'm going to pull up a couple of slides here that I think could be helpful. Once you look at the need to change, is basically what type of change are you engaged in? And one of the things that we have realized in working with teams all over the country is that we have had some historical change methods that are not serving us well today in this environment of rapid change external to us. And the point I'm making is up at number 1 here on the slide is sequential change. One of the models that we see a lot is sequential change, and that means I'm going to change one thing, and then I'm going to change another thing, and then I'm going to change something else. And it's almost like we are basically lining our changes up. We're lining our changes up in order to get to the next change. The problem with that is that our staff get exhausted, because it's almost like I was working with someone and we were going to do, basically collaborative documentation. And they said, well, we can't do that till we, implement our new EHR. Okay, so then, but before we do that, we need to do this. And it was almost like we had all these changes stacked up. The problem is exhaustion. The staff we keep talking to staff about change. We just don't change quickly, as opposed to number 4 on this slide, transformational. Transformational is we change multiple things at one time. And that is so critical to our environment today. We have to look at rapid cycle, plan, do, study, act, and the whole concept of how can we pilot what we need to change and to see if it's working. If not, let's change it and modify it again and roll it back out. But the concept of sequential change, let's do one thing and then another, it is such a slow method, and it used to work for us in the 70s and 80s and 90s and early 2000s when our external environment wasn't changing as rapidly. The other thing I see around really challenges around change is using a quality improvement model, number 2, versus a number 5, continuous quality improvement. A quality improvement model means everybody has to be happy with every change before we can move forward. And that's kind of the model that we use to change. The problem with that is it's very hard to get everyone to agree on what we're going to have for lunch, much less if we're going to implement same-day access. So again, a continuous quality improvement is using a definite decision-making model, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and to have an ability to actually make decisions and move forward. You see, consensus building is a wonderful clinical skill. It really is. But in an organization having to change internally to respond to external change, it absolutely produces disempowerment for the team and the organization because we continue to elongate the planning or discussion phase. And consensus decision making really creates staff fatigue. You know, the question here on the bottom of this slide, you know, I've sat in this meeting for 2 hours. What did I accomplish? And if all we accomplished was talking about change or the need to change, but not how we're going to change and who's going to do it and when are we going to do it, again, that consensus model trying to get everybody happy just produces fatigue. And what we see in systems that try to change or centers that try to change is the consensus model exhausts the energy. The very energy you need to change is exhausted by the process. And so if you look at on the left here, the committee of the whole, sequential change, making sure everybody's okay, what if, versus galvanized team members. These are team members that really don't want to change, and they're really talking in terms of, well, you know, we tried this 10 years ago, we tried it 5 years ago, it won't work. Collective authority is held by the actual committee, versus on the right, what we advocate is a delegated authority, a transformational change model that you're dealing with multiple change goals at the same time. And then CQI, action-based, let's try it, let's pilot it, let's study it. If it's better, then we'll continue it. If not, let's change it and make it better. But number 3 is critical. If we can't agree in consensus within a reasonable period of time, then 70% of the people in the committee or on the team voting in the affirmative for an idea or a solution is a decision. And we're done. We're going to move forward and we're going to pilot that. And I think those are the types of changes, Amanda, that I see that are really giving us a problem. It's really the method we use or the processes we use. You know, we change at C-level. That's where the staff are. That's where the consumers that we serve are. That's where we actually need to change. But so many times in consensus, we spend about 10 or 20,000 feet above sea level. We talk philosophically. We talk about anecdotal stuff. We really don't have data. So we just talk about what if and what if and what if. All of those things absolutely impede our ability to change.
Yep.
So David, we thank you for all that. That I think gives a lot of material that people can grab onto to understand how to organize. And implicit in all that, of course, is the first rule. It's the first paragraph of the first page of the first chapter of the leadership handbook, which is first, get the right people on the bus, put them in the right seat, and point the bus in the right direction. You can do the kinds of things we're talking about all day long if you have the team to do it. My team is, I'm grateful every day for my team. They do a great job with helping keep the whole thing put together with me. But they're all in there all the time with me. And as many of them would laugh, not all, but many of them would laugh when I say it's the metaphor here is athletics, because a lot of them don't follow athletics, but I call it the ready position, that you're in a dynamic position with your feet shoulder width apart, your knees bent, your hands forward, your eyes forward, and you're ready to go in any direction. So that is dynamic leadership, as I call it, that we are ready to move in any direction. And because we are like-minded, because I have spent the time getting people on board, and who then have caused other people to come on board, and that we're like-minded people. The funny thing is, I do make these decisions. I am out in the tip of the spear and initiating change, but this group is so like-minded, they're all right there with me every step of the way, and they're excited about it, and they're interested, and they see the value, and we move forward. So while I don't call for a vote, but I don't have to. They're all there. Everybody's on board. They're like, we're with you. And there are times then in moving through some of these big change initiatives that the crew, whoever that might be in any organization, is wide-eyed thinking, is this going to work? Are we going to be able to do this? Is this going to fall flat? Is there going to be a problem? And so then that's really where my leadership has to come in to help them understand where we are in the process, how it's going to go, what the outcomes, because I'm weighing that all the time. I key in on that and try and describe what the process is and what we're going to see and what's coming out of it and so on. And they've built a lot of trust in me, because I have had success in those change initiatives that have caused that. But to your point, then while we're all in the ready position, we all kind of move forward together, and we're using data all the time. We do plan, do, study, act in terms of how to, I call it design build, like you're designing and you're building all at the same time, and you're using data to tweak that design so you get it right as you move along. And that model, and it's not that there are never setbacks or things like that, because external factors intervene in ways that sometimes disrupt that. But by and large, if you have a team, a leadership team, or a project leadership team, it doesn't have to be the executive leadership. It can be the project leadership team that's looking at the data and doing the design build, then a change management team. If you have that, you can move forward in pretty efficient ways and provide services that really benefit people. And we have done that time and time and time again, find great success with it, know that it's dynamic, know that there's going to be a setback here or a bump in the road here, but we're ready for that, and we're problem solvers, and we're able to have some success with it. So, and I think it's just a heck of a lot of fun. It's right up my alley in terms of the kinds of things that I love in the world, and so it's not only beneficial to people outside of our organization, but I think people enjoy that process. And in fact, I just was in a group this morning, and they were talking about what we spun the wheel, it landed on me, and so then everybody had to say something nice about me. And one of the things they said is, we love your upbeat, how positive you are, how passionate you are. And what I know about that is that that's what people want to follow, is that positive, upbeat. Every time I land, my foot's on fairly solid ground and going forward. And as a person, I never have a good sense of that. So their feedback was hugely beneficial to me to know that's the kind of thing that's working. But I can't overemphasize right person, right seat, bus going in the right direction.
And Amanda, can I comment on that? Because I think Topher has hit upon a very, very important point. Topher has a great, concept of the right person on the bus at the right time with the right seat. But I really think as a leader of your organization, you really have to look at who is on your bus in terms of your team, in terms of people at different levels of the organization or at all levels. I think leadership can be provided at any level of the organization. It's not just the end quote leader. It must be at all levels. And a lot of this is really approach or roles that people play. And so I've given you here on the slide basically the 3 different roles we see that can be present within an organization. The problem is that some of these roles are really problematic if you're trying to transform your organization. And this first role is the supervisor role. That's not a title. It is basically a role. And that person who is you have in a leadership type role or supervisor or manager role is basically focused on reactive and retrospective problem solving. They always look back. They're not looking forward. And basically they just reprocess over and over crisis. You know, we talk about it, but nothing really changes. I was working with a team the other day and I said, so how long have you all been talking about turning in your documentation timely and appropriately and correctly? And one lady said 21 years. And I said, well, don't you think that's enough? And the point is a supervisor role, again, that role is that we'll just talk about things, but really not do anything to change it. Whereas a manager role has an awareness, and that's the data that Topher's talking about. I'm aware of the situation, not because it's anecdotal, and supervisors use a lot of anecdotal. You know, I think it's better, don't you? I heard it was better. Managers actually look at the data and say, okay, based on these data points, I can make a decision. And therefore, she or he manages complexities. And I think today, we have more complex organizations that need that manager type role. And the real thing that I think, Topher has alluded to, and he is certainly this, is he's a leader, coach, mentor. And you heard that in what he just described from his team. He leads because he can envision possibilities for the organization. He has an awareness. He knows the data. He knows where he is and he knows the outcome he's achieving, but therefore he can envision where we need to go. And therefore he or she manages or sustains change. I would encourage you to write these 3 roles down. And at your next management team meeting, as people are sharing about the new challenge and what we're going to do, what role do individual team members play in that meeting? The key thing about change is this. Change will create grieving. And I learned this in 1993 when I became deputy director of a behavioral health center after 25 years in the for-profit world. I came into a situation where we had to change in order to stay in business. But what I realized, based on some of the study I did at Duke University back in the 70s, is this was like grieving. We had staff who really had to go through a process of acceptance of change. So many times our staff have done the same process or the same methods for a long time. We even give them personal names, that Bill created this form or Sue did that. And we can't do this because that will upset Sue. The key thing about change is understanding the different processes to get to number 6. First is denial. Why do we have to change? Why do you want to change this? Negotiation. Well, if we have to change it, then I would like to make sure that our program, it's a little bit different because we serve children and they're different than adults. And so we're going to have a little bit difference because we need to negotiate our changes. And then if you say, no, we've got to do it, there's anxiety. And it really is a lot of, I don't know if I can do this change. I'm not sure how it's going to work for me. That number 3 turns into blaming. And then 4 is I'm just going to withdraw. I'm just going to drop out. This is awful. And number 5 is acceptance of the need to change. You see, the first 4 of these are negative emotions that creates unbelievable concern, emotional outburst, really, within your organization until you can get them to understand the need to change. This is why we're doing it. But more importantly, back to what Topher was talking about, is can I get my leaders to be excited about taking advantage of this change? You see, a supervisor role will stay up here at negotiation, number 2, and they'll try to push their staff through the change, but it's not going to work. A leader has to be at number 6, and we have to pull our staff through these processes of change. And so many times when you start to change, make transformational change happen internally, a lot of our teams will call and say, our staff are all upset. Everybody's, going to quit. I mean, it's just like, major crisis. And the answer is, are your leaders pulling your staff through this process? And I think that, to me, when you talk about, Amanda, the external requirements and how do we change, some of these issues are really, really real and present such an overwhelming pushback. Now, what Topher has done over time, he's brought the right people on the bus. He has the vision and they share the vision. That's where you want to go. But as you try to get there, if you find yourself in this model of just a lot of emotion, we can never change, we talk about it, then you might want to look at who's on your bus.
That's a perfect segue, I think, to talk, you talk about people on the bus. Every organization is struggling right now with workforce retention. And that is another, I would imagine you all would both feel like that's another form of change. And and I would be curious to hear you talk about how do you advance change and maintain staff, or how do you maximize, if staff is going to change, how do you adapt to that change that maybe was not of your choosing in any time, but particularly in the world we're living in right now after the pandemic, when folks are exhausted and might be even more reluctant to embrace change. Can you all talk about sort of how change and staffing intersect right now? Topher, maybe you want to take a stab at that one first?
Yeah. So you can't stop changing because you have staff issues, right? You don't stop growing, evolving because you have a staff shortage. And so we have continued that track to evolving and growing. We've expanded. It's we're going both ways at the same time, because our licensed people, mostly therapists, but some nurses as well, have been dropping off, and it's hard to find therapists. We had a period of time where we had so many positions open that were therapy positions, but nobody was applying. They weren't out there, and so then that caught, you have to think about that solution and get outside the box. Maybe there's another way to do things that we're not approaching right now, and so you have to go about that. But what I've said to staff is, in light of the program expansion and so on, is we need to keep marching on, and this is like any of us have experienced in relationships, whether it's a love relationship or a friend relationship. When you meet somebody, there's something about that person that's of interest to you. Oh, we really are like-minded. I love how that person thinks, or we love the same hobbies, or whatever it is that you're like-minded in that way. And so then you would become friends. You get to know each other a little bit more and evolve in your relationship. And I have said, this is what we need to do in terms of the staffing issue, is we need to just double down on who we are, not who we try to be for the outside, but who we actually are. What are our values? How do we operate? How do we take care of the people that are working here, as well as the people that we're serving? And so the world that is out there looking, or that may run into us, sees us and goes, oh, I like who they are. I want to go work there, because that's ultimately the decision. They're deciding, I want to go relate to that organization and be part of it. Then the issue of change might come in as they enter into the program and see what's going on. We have probably gone through this conversation in our interviewing about evolution and change and so on, to see if that's something that they can live with in their life, because not everybody can. Some people have a very hard time changing, and other people are very open to it, and everything in between. So we want to know that up front. But then once we employ somebody, then to be able to help them become involved in our culture, of change and the other cultural elements that we have with a full heart, that they can embrace that and be excited, as David said, about it. And so so those are two exclusive concepts that relate to one another sometimes, but because we don't have staff doesn't stop our change. And if we pause our change, that doesn't stop our needing to retain and be good to staff and have that quality. So we kind of do it all at the same time. And you know, as I've talked about this before, none of this stands alone. It's all woven together like that. And so while staffing is its own issue, it involves so many things. It touches so many things. And same with the change that we do. It touches staff, it touches the culture, touches the community. So anyway, my thoughts.
You know, and it's interesting to me because, you know, as Topher has shared with you, nationally we have a shortage of workers. I'm not sure what the cause is or what the solution is, to be honest. You know, I was meeting with teams again in Florida this week, and they have a tremendous shortage, just like in Lincoln, Nebraska. What we've tried to look at on retention, and I think one of the things that we need to look at is when I became deputy director of this behavioral health center, what I realized is the staff, I watched them leave and come into our, you know, employee exit and entrance of this building every day. My window overlooked it, but I saw our staff were absolutely exhausted. And I had no idea that people candidly could stay that tired and that exhausted. And so what we've been trying to do over the years is to try to improve the quality of work life of the staff we have in order to retain them. And give you a case study. We were asked to do collaborative documentation training, and the reason I created kind of the concurrent documentation model in the 1993 era, which is now collaborative documentation, is that I saw staff in those days, taking home charts, working at night, trying to catch up with their charting pre-HIPAA. And now we can't do that post-HIPAA. But basically, they never caught up. We were just working in a northern state, and we were asked to do a pilot program for collaborative documentation. And one of the volunteers was a therapist, an MSW, LCSW, who's basically, at the time they joined the pilot, was running anywhere from 15 days to as much as 40 days behind in documenting the services they were providing. I want you to think about that, because what had happened to this staff is they were overwhelmed. They were absolutely defeated and had told the director that they thought they should just go ahead and leave the field or try going somewhere else. They just could not get it done. So we went through training with this particular group, including this therapist. In October and now November, the therapist was submitting data, all their progress notes and documentation within no more than 2 days post-service date. Now, what's happened is this therapist has said, you know, I was going to leave, but I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I changed the process of documenting. And I think so many times, like same-day access, we have for years scheduled people and 50% don't show up. And we've scheduled and they don't show up. And we are constantly busy, but we're not seeing the clients. In one team in Florida, we went to same day last March. And in the next 2 months, they delivered 1,000 more intake assessments by not scheduling, but they did it with the same or less staff. So it's not about bringing more staff in to the processes that aren't working. And when we can't hire them, if they're not out there, as we are seeing now, then we must be efficient and effective in looking at the processes for our current staff. And are we absolutely exhausting them with our process? And so many of the things that we've been doing are process improvement. You know, we're trying to take care of the people who are taking care of the people. You know, that's the motto of our company. And I think that concept is, have you done everything you can internally to make the current staff work, number one, satisfied, and number two, not so overwhelmed all the time. One of the clinicians, I said, how is same-day access working? And she said, Mr. Lloyd, what we're doing now is we're actually serving people that I was trained to serve. She said before, all we were doing was scheduling and they not come in. She said, we were actually helping people now. And I think, again, job satisfaction to retain who we have employed now is so critical, particularly if there's no one else to bring in.
Topher, I know you all have implemented, excuse me, same-day access. Is there ever a time when it's hard to maintain that change? When if you've got staffing shortages or other challenges, and it's one thing to implement a change, it's another thing to maintain it and keep it going. Has that been a challenge for you at all with same-day access or with any other change? And do you have some insights on how to keep change going even when it gets hard?
Right. Well, to David's point about, why is this happening and how do we change it? Well, my initiative to change it is I've taken little pinches of the people that are the best performers in our organization across the board, and I'm growing those in a little petri dish in the back of my house here. And in 20 or 25 years, I'll have a whole wonderful staff. I have a lot of people to put through college. So we've run into two. I love same-day access. And, for the people we serve in particular, so CenterPoint served a little over 4,400 people last year, and 57% of those people made less than $1,000 a year. So the question is, 0 to 1,000, they check that box. So they make nothing. So that is the majority of the people that we see. So then the question has to be, why do we expect that they're going to remember to come to an appointment 2 weeks from Thursday at 2:30 when their world is a challenge every single day? And they don't have that kind of trapping necessarily that many people do with phones and calendars and things like that. So it makes great sense to do that, and it meets the person's need when they need it and are available to do it. It makes so much sense. It's one of those change things that sometimes we need to get out of our own way so we can see the things that make so much sense on what we should do and why. So our challenge in that has been that people, as they go through school and so on, are trained to schedule their own appointment, to kind of manage their own world. And so you have to change all that and disrupt that. And the process David described of grieving is really a part of that, that it is a new culture. And so we had, and I say had, we have big challenges with that as we go forward, because unfortunately we don't have the same staff who have been here for 20 years. We've turned staff over. And so with every new person, you have to inculcate them into that cultural issue, and it is a challenge, but we figured that out for the most part. The other right now is our staffing issue, and so that completely blew up our same-day access. We, in essence, do not have same-day access right now because we have one therapist in our outpatient. We should have 4 or 5. And we have one right now who's departing in a couple of weeks. But the good news is we've had 2 interviews with other people, and we're going to telehealth to bring in people that can do it that way. And so we're trying to get outside the box and think differently about it. We do have a crisis response team, which is interesting to me that we have more people in crisis response that are licensed than we do in ongoing therapy, but that's, they love it. They love doing that crisis response, and they're super good at it. And so what they're doing, in fact, I was with them yesterday, and they were all rallying around the fact that they're keeping this thing pulled together, and they're proud of that fact that they're hanging in there together. So we have challenges on same-day access because we don't have the people right now. And, you know, one person can't do same-day access. You know, we've got to have some ongoing therapy as well, and so we're trying to balance all that right now. We're just in scramble mode right now, frankly, with the number of people coming in for assessments and crisis response and ongoing therapy. But what we do is the same thing we always do. We look at it as a team. We try and have all the considerations in the box and outside the box, if you will, and come up with a solution that can meet the current situation and give people quality care. As we grow our staff and we see the corner turning a little bit, so we're hopeful that we will continue to grow staff back and have licensed people on board. As we do that, then we'll once again begin to employ same-day access again, so people get the care when they need the care, and we can still do our crisis response, our access, and ongoing therapy. So it's a real challenge right now. But you know, when we first did this, Scott Lloyd was leading our team, and we had, it was a learning community, so there were several other organizations involved. And Scott said in one of the meetings, Topher, I want to congratulate you. Your team has done the best at turning that time, you know, getting the time down to admission. And I said, well, Scott, wait, now the reason we did the best is because we sucked in the beginning. We were the worst. So we had, it was like easy to get better. You know, it's a great thing to do as an organization in serving people, is to look at, I call it technology, look at technology like that can help you improve in that way. And in the first year, we served 400 more people. And then when we got CCBHC and expanded out a little bit, we served 1,000 more people. And it's because all those little barriers were broken down, and our motion was fluid, and it worked great. So we enjoyed that for a number of years until the staffing shortage hit.
Yeah. So we've talked today about the benefits of change, and there are many, obviously, but change doesn't come without risk, right? And there's risk in changing, and there's risk in not changing. I wonder, the two of you have been in leadership positions for a long enough to be able to kind of reflect back. Are there risks that you've taken that you were able to mitigate were there changes you implemented, then you were able in implementing those to mitigate the risk that that you could make a wrong decision, or that people wouldn't understand where you were going or wouldn't get on board, you know, that sort of mitigation of risk in the midst of change, and the benefit maybe of some risk taking in the midst of change. How do you think about those two sides of the same coin in some ways together? David, maybe you can start us. And let me just say to folks that are listening in, you know, I think we will start to wrap up this conversation and be welcoming of any questions you've got for David or Topher after they tackle the risk question. So yeah, David, jump in with any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, you know, risk, in fact, my definition of leadership in my last book, Leadership Skills book, is a person who's willing to step across the threshold of risk and make bold and creative decisions about changing process, changing service delivery, whatever they need to do to meet the external change requirements. And that threshold is literally stepping across, thinking, I'm not quite sure this is going to work or not, but I'm willing to step across and try it in that CQI model. But I think part of the challenge that we have in our industry is we need data. Data is the only thing that I have found that will reduce risk. Meaning, if I know where we are, like the same day access model only works if you know what you're doing before you start same day access, so that you can mitigate the challenges and change it so that same day access metrically works. But I want to share an example. I think this is the most black and white example I could give you, and I'm going to pull this back up because I think it's important. The National Council, this is a conceptual thing, but I think it's reality. The National Council in 2015 asked MTM Services to decide how to measure value or to come to some metrics around how do we measure value. And so we came to and presented this formula, if you will. Number one, value-based care, as we've been hearing, or value-based reimbursement. The services were provided. How many services? What was their duration, their density? What was the cost of those services per CPT or HCPCS code, by staff type? And then what outcomes objectively did you achieve? You know, and those three together determine number four, value. Now that's conceptual. And so, Amanda, if I'm going to take to and talk to staff about, I really want you to now look at value-based care, and we need to move to value-based care. This is, you know, a fairly descriptive 1, 2, 3, 4 formula, but until you actually use data such as this, it really doesn't really hit home in many cases. Example, if I were to show you here that the top row is the outcome scores based on the DLA-20, and the delta score is the difference between the intake DLA-20 and the most current one in the last 90 days. And if you look at this top chart, anything above that center bar line that I'm touching on is a positive change in functionality. Anything below, actually they decreased in functionality for this population. These are all de-identified but actual behavioral health centers in a network. On the bottom, how much did it cost them to deliver this outcome? And if you look down at the bottom, the average, by the way, is $1,200 for all of the providers to deliver the services per month. But if you look down at the bottom, you've got some at $2,000 and you've got some at $794. The question is, if you were going to measure value, which one of these centers would have the best value if you were the payer, if you were the managed care entity, or if you were the network manager who's going to refer clients into you? And so all of a sudden, these data points give you a very objective understanding. And back to your original question too, Amanda, with these data points, I can get beyond the anecdotal. I think we're doing pretty good. You know, what we used to, oh, it's much better than it used to be. This actually says that, candidly, if I'm going to contract with one of these providers, it's going to be DRC or PKC, because their outcomes are there and they're actually below the average cost. They would be my gold providers or my preferred providers. So I think when we talk about risk, I can use those data points and make a decision about how we're delivering services and reduce my risk of not knowing where to go. Because if I don't know where I am, data, I can't really know where to go, and it's risky if you don't have the data.
And not to mention, with regard to data and knowing is outcome data and knowing whether you're helping or harming. You know, you've got just as much possibility to hurt somebody as you do to help them. And you ought to measure those things so you really understand the benefit you're providing and not just have it be a gut level thing. That data is critical. I've done several big projects. One that I explored and spent, you know, probably $20,000 on developing, and then the data that I could develop at that point, I couldn't have developed it prior. But the data I developed at that point then clearly said to me, this was not a good idea, and I dropped it like a hot rock. The good news to that is it was the late fall, early winter of '07, And had I taken that project on in '08, when everything sunk, I would have really been in trouble. I didn't know '08 was coming, but the data was on the wall at that point, so I dropped it. But I've done other, I've done a 25% expansion. I've bought and developed a building for $8 million. I'm in a $27 million development right now on a facility for our organization that's outpatient and residential and so on. And I tell you, I really feel deeply the fiduciary responsibility that I carry as a part of this organization, using public dollars for public benefit. And so when I take a step, I make sure I have solid ground to step on it, and data is the way that I know that, whether it's data on our performance, but also data in the financial numbers. I look at that all the time, and you know, there's what you say, David. You cross the line, and you may still go, I'm not sure if this is going to work. But you've got to look at the data as best you can, get your crystal ball out, and try to understand what this is going to be. But always have an exit plan. Always be able to pull the project. Have a back door on these things. And I have developed back doors for everything, but never had to use them. And so our expansion is going great. Our $8 million development was awesome and worked great. And the other project is the same way. You know, not many people can say this, but it's coming in on time, and it sort of is coming in on budget, being sort of because material costs went up $6 million on the project, but we had a great successful capital campaign, and I have 1.1 million left to pay for the entire project, and have in excess of that in asks out that I'm waiting on response. So and it's because I measure every step of the way. I'm not going to get caught that way, but there is a certain amount of risk that I take in doing that. It's just a calculated risk. So that's what I would say to that.
Well, we've covered a lot today, and I think this has been a really, really interesting conversation. As we wrap up, I wonder if there is anything that you all want to either re-emphasize, or anything we haven't covered, any kind of last top key advice you would give folks as they think about leadership and change?
You know, yeah. I think about the spirit. So I have a little message on my desk. It says, inspire the spirit, don't manage the flesh. And that's the mantra I've lived by for a long time now. And it isn't that you don't need management. It's that if you get the right people and you inspire their spirit, they'll be right there with you. And that's been my experience with my leadership team. But organizations are super complex. We all know that. We just went through a CAR survey, and there's 22,123 standards that we live by. That's how complex it is. You have to do that many different things. And I think of the Lloyd family and the passion for race cars. And you know, the driver is a way different person than the owner and the pit boss, and you know, you have different roles and different talents and different things going on, but they all have to hum. And so I call myself the orchestra leader, that I know how to wave the baton, but I can't play any of the instruments. But as an orchestra leader, I have to know how to make beautiful music. And that's part of the fun. It's part of the challenge. And it's dynamic. There's no fixed moment. A guy said to me today on our team, I see myself wanting to be a leader. I don't know if I could be like you. And I said, no, you don't want to be like me. I said, be who you are. That's your magic. be who you are fully. And when it comes out of here, that's the thing people are attracted to. They're not attracted to just straight up head talk. They're attracted to heart talk, passion talk. And you always have to have your brain connected to your heart, right? If you don't, you're in trouble. And so I said that to him because he is a great leader and will be a great leader in the future.
I love that. David, what about you?
I think, if I were to give, and I was looking at some of the chat questions that are coming in, which I know we need to move to, but, very simply, hire staff for attitude. Hire for attitude and train for skills. A person with a positive attitude we can do this and we can get this done, who's willing to learn, is so valuable to your organization. And I know it's hard to find staff right now, but as you interview and try to recruit, please try to look at the attitude. Are they willing to take a risk? Are they willing to step through that with you? And that attitude of leadership, we can do this, getting excited about it, is so critical to bring the staff along through any change that you might face.
That's great advice. And that maybe is a perfect segue for one of the questions we've got in the chat about navigating a merger and trying to blend teams that may be feeling a little us and them in their mentality. David, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I think, mergers really, and we've worked with quite a few, it really does come down to two different organizations with two different potential cultures, two different processes of how they do it, but also two different sets of leaders. And how to get them to see a common vision is the secret of a merger. Because it can't be forever us and them. I think initially it will always be until you actually go in and say, okay, there are two processes here. We're going to, fold them into one. We're going to have a new process or a blended process. But I think you're going to have to go through each of the things that create the us and them and try to minimize the difference and try to move towards, and give yourself, 6 months. What is your time frame to make sure these processes are no longer distinctive, whatever the process might be, including bringing people into care, how you deliver care, whatever it might be. I think the ultimate thing, and I say this, I think the ultimate thing is there's some egos that will have to let go of ownership. And that typically has been the real challenge, where egos of two different sets of leaders will not let go and envision what the new entity might be. And that comes back to that spirit that I think Topher was talking about, and a vision of where we might want to go together and why. Why are we doing this? What are our strengths? What can we do combined? It's almost like a SWOT analysis. What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And if your weaknesses are met with strengths from your merging entity, what a wonderful way to build a stronger organization. So try to point out how your strengths can meet their weaknesses or vice versa. But I think the vision is important. Somebody needs to have a real vision of where you're going to go. And by the way, a time frame to get there. This can't go on for 2 or 3 years. And I've seen it, and it absolutely bogs down everyone. When are we going to be finished with this and we're going to be the new entity?
Yeah, I'm in 2 programs right now where the funders sort of required that we come together and live together. So actually some staff are from Centerpoint and some are from the other organization. And but we're the same types of organizations, a little different philosophically. And that makes it really hard. And it's sort of like being told who your roommate's going to be, right? And makes it difficult that way. I think David's question, why are we merging? That one has to get answered up front and thoroughly, and be really the core of the whole thing, because mergers are super hard. I have done acquisitions, not mergers. And even the acquisitions, the rule of thumb going is a third will stay, a third will leave on their own, and a third you'll probably terminate. And my experience has been the culture was so different that probably 95% ultimately in the last 5 years are gone. And we have had to build our own team that was really consistent with our own culture in order to perform. And the other acquisitions have been smaller, but fairly the same way, that you've got to decide who you are as an organization and stick with that and try to bring people in. And we've had some success with a few people, but not a lot. And culture is a really big deal in the substance use community and in the mental health community. And so finding alignment is important. And if you don't, then you're going to have that attrition. Yeah, so it's been a challenge for us, but it took time, but we've gotten there and feel pretty successful with it now.
Well, thank you both. Speaking of time, I think our time has flown by. I want to thank you both for sharing so many insights and so much of yourself today. I think this has been a very personal and intimate conversation, and hopefully helpful and interesting to the folks that have been on. Thanks for joining us today. We will.
I gotta say something, Amanda.
Yeah.
We're talking about transformational change, and I want to tell you, Centerpoint would not be, and this is not a paid commercial, Centerpoint would not be who it is today without MTM services. The things that you all have seen on the slide deck today are a piece of what we have gone through. And while I have the vision, I know where we're going, I don't necessarily know how to do it, but between David and Scott and David and Michael and the whole team at MTM that we have worked with, I'm telling you, they have transformed Centerpoint to be a leading organization in our neck of the woods, and have just loved the relationship. So besides they're great people, that's the benefit.
Thank you, Topher. Thank you very much. And I appreciate this opportunity to be with you and share with you. And Amanda, thank you for what you've done to lead us today. I appreciate it. You've done a great job. I hope that you're going to be looking for a future role as a narrator and of blogs and webinars. But thank you for all the work you've done to put this together.
Well, thank you all. And thanks everyone for being with us today. And we will get this recording up on our website and out via email, and tune in for the next one. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Topher. Thank you, Amanda. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.